Good afternoon. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I know that we have people joining us, I think, on pretty much all the coasts. So, good morning, good afternoon. I am on Party. I'm the Chief Strategy and Operations Officer at Civicego. I won't introduce Civicego because we have Damola here, and I'll allow him to introduce the company. But we are very excited for today's webinar and fireside chat with Wintana, and I'll have her introduce herself. And the focus for today's webinar is how to keep winning as a remote advocacy team. We know that we are navigating some very tumultuous times from a standpoint of economic, social, and cultural impacts throughout not only the communities that we live in, but throughout the world. And so we know that continuing to move issues forward is very important. So we're really excited about this conversation. So I will just go ahead and kick it off and ask both of you to please introduce yourself and your organization. I'm going to start with you, Damola.
Hey, everybody. So my name is Damola Ogunapin. I'm the CEO of Civicego. And at Civicego, we built a legislative intelligence and remote collaboration tool for advocacy groups to help them discover and track legislation and also build coalitions with partners. At Civicego, we're also a remote first company. So everybody at our company works from their home office, from co-working spaces, from coffee shops when all those places reopen. So we really have a clear understanding of not only the advocacy space and building software for advocacy groups, but then also how to run effectively a remote team, since we've been remote first for the last several years.
Thank you. Welcome. Wintana, can you introduce yourself and tell us more about Minnesota Voice?
Yeah. Hey, y'all. My name is Wintana Melakeen. I am an executive director of Minnesota Voice. And what we are is a community organization that is a coalition of nonprofits spread out across the state of Minnesota. We're in every corner and every neighborhood. And what we do is invest in up and coming organizations and also large organizations' direct services to make sure that they're integrating civic engagement into all of the work they do. We build coalitions, we build tools, we build partnerships, and all of that is a long-term goal to build powers for underrepresented communities.
Well, thank you both for that introduction. I just want to go a little bit deeper, Wintana. You mentioned just briefly, I'll say how you fit into the advocacy ecosystem, and you mentioned civic engagement. Can you go a little bit deeper on that and tell us a bit more about how Minnesota Voice shows up in that space?
Definitely. So we were founded in 2011, and we started off as just a coalition made up of leaders that wanted to figure out how they can support nonprofits in doing civic engagement. And then we grew from there. In 2014, we launched our first fellows program, and I was actually one of those lucky fellows. So I was a part of their inaugural program where they invested in 25 leaders across the state, also invested in 25 organizations at the same time. They placed us at organizations, they trained us, and they developed us as leaders. From then on, we went to actually partner with organizations to run coordinated GOTV programs. So our annual Get Out the Vote program, GOTV for short, is actually a really robust program all across the state. We have voter turnout centers in every pocket: Bemidji, Duluth, St. Cloud, Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, and these are various cities across Minnesota. And what we do is we pick a location, we get the nonprofits that are have the same base or the same values, or even just maybe same geography, and we get them to coordinate on a Get Out the Vote plan so that they're all mobilizing together and they're actually strategically using their resources instead of having one-off centers, one-off plans. We actually bring folks to the table, provide them with resources, tools to build out Get Out the Vote strategies. But we don't just focus on elections. Often people think civic engagement means just elections, but we actually work on public policy. We actually just 2 days ago passed our first bill.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We were able to move $17 million of HAVA money, Help America Vote. It's a national fund through our state level, and now get it moved to our Secretary of State. We also passed some other pieces of policy in there around helping to make sure we have enough election judges and things like that. polling places. And so it's, you have your get out the vote work, you have your policy work. We also work on the census, leadership development. So we see civic engagement as whatever civic duty an individual wants to take. We want to help them do that. Sometimes that means direct action. Sometimes that means protesting. We support the entire spectrum of what folks need to be a part of their community and to be a civic leader. And that's who we are. That's what we do. And we're really excited to be on this call with you guys.
Thank you. And you mentioned the whole ecosystem. One thing that you lifted up that I actually want to come back to is this collaboration piece. But I just want to ask Damola quickly, how does Civicego fit into this advocacy ecosystem, and hearing how Wantana has explained their work?
Yeah, so at Civicego, we're absolutely in love with advocacy groups and the work that advocacy organizations do. And for us, the reason why we care so much and we're so passionate about it is because we understand the role that these organizations play in the democratic process. They are our voices. They are the voices of our communities. They are the ones that are moving legislation. When Tana just put it so eloquently about some of the work that they've been able to accomplish at Minnesota Voice. And for us, we want to be great partners and support that work, that great work. And the way that we partner is through technology. So our technology is what helps these organizations be able to do the legislative research, the legislative analysis that they need to do, so that they're put in a position to be able to advocate for policy effectively and efficiently, but not just in a silo, right? You alluded to collaboration, Chantera. And what we found is that, advocacy work is a relationship business. It's a relationship sport. So we've really focused our efforts as we build our technology solutions on helping these groups and these individuals that work in these advocacy groups and organizations be able to build relationships more effectively and more efficiently, not just with lawmakers and with their internal, organizational teammates, but also externally with coalition partners. And also for us, one of the most important aspects that we recognized around advocacy is effectively getting knowledge, learning about what the bills are, what's happening, and knowing which bills are being introduced, what the impact is, who to speak with. And our technology also helps with that. So for us, it's about being great partners to advocacy organizations and the advocacy ecosystem, and leveraging what we do really well, which is creating great, beautiful technology, and then getting it into the hands of the folks that are doing this work on the front lines. So we thank you all for that work, and hopefully we're playing our role in the democratic process.
It's very interesting that you both uplifted the same principles around partnership and collaboration and relationship building, which on its face, if you think about individuals on the front line and you think about technology, those things possibly would not seem like they would matter to both of the organizations at the same level, but it seems that is core to the work that each of you do. Would you agree to that?
100%. Yeah.
Definitely.
Good. So I do want to go deeper into the collaboration, but I do want to lift up this whole aspect of working remotely and get an understanding of, how's it working? How's Minnesota Voice adapting to working remotely? You listed a whole lot of work that requires touch.
Yeah.
How are you doing it?
I think the number one thing to successfully working remotely is having an ecosystem. I think about it much, I'm very bad with technology, but I think about it as
we're gonna get you better.
Yeah, you guys will help us out. But I think about it like Ethernets and internet cords, it all is a web, it's not just independent networks. These are all networks that are connected within each other. And that's what makes a successful virtual workplace. If you have colleagues and coworkers that are too afraid to call each other, that don't want to send text messages or aren't into Zoom, you could really fall apart. But if you don't have that original relationship, I think that's a key part. And just to touch on what you talked about with ecosystems, when we started Minnesota Voice, we had a set of partners. The first thing I did while we were able to meet in person, at 100 meetings in 30 days. You know, that's multiple meetings a day with individuals, with organizations, building relationships. We did a lot of assessments. We did a lot of polls and testing. And a lot of that doesn't have to be in person. You know, that's how we measured where are the strengths and weaknesses within our system, just like you would do any other network. And then from there, we made some definitions of what are partners, what are not partners, how are we accountable to each other. And so when we transitioned into the internet world, into the online world, it was actually an easy transition because we had already defined our partnership. We had defined our ecosystem. One thing in nonprofits, we get very competitive. And one thing we've been building out is really the framework around an ecosystem. You know, somebody is going to be the Amazoic, like, you know, 50 feet tall tree, and someone is going to be the moss. Neither one of them is more important than the other. They're actually both dramatically important to the ecosystem. They just play different roles. And so we've been working with our partners to get folks clear on what their role is and making sure they understand how important their role is, which all led to this moment when we had to pivot to working online. You know, we're working to register 72,000 people in the state of Minnesota. A lot of folks were like, guess your program's over. Absolutely not. I've actually worked on building an online voter registration tool, working with our Secretary of State to build an API. In a few days, we're going to launch an online voter registration tool for the public. Like, we just moved it. You know, relationships don't stop because you can't touch. I think there's also another layer is that there are thousands of people in our prisons that organize every single day without actually being able to see someone in person. You know, there are folks that are disabled that can't come to community meetings that for years have been organizing virtually. There are folks across the globe. And so this isn't a new this isn't brand new. This is something that a lot of folks with different privileges have been doing. We are now just leveraging it just to fill a different gap. But I think all of the relationships and the ecosystem building and tending the soil prepared us so that, you know, we can still water the ecosystem even though we're not there in person. And that's, I think, is what has led to our success.
That's really great. And a couple of things that you really drove home around having those foundational relationships. It's not a one and done. It's a continuous connection. And that connection, depending on what you're working on together, is going to show up differently. But if you don't have that foundational connection, the other thing that I think is important that what you said is that going into those relationships, when you have shared meaning and shared understanding, you're able to get those shared outcomes, no matter if you're in person or online. Absolutely. And that's something that's very important that I think is very interesting. So Damola, as a remote company leader, do you have any thoughts on Wintana's approach to remote work, since you've been at it since the beginning of Civicego's development?
Yeah, I think Wintana made some very great points, and they kind of fall under 4 themes that I want to address right now with everybody. Remote work is something that you really have to build a process around. You can't take what works kind of in the physical space and then just shift it over to, working through computers and meeting and talking and kind of having the processes be the same. They have to shift, they have to adjust. And I'm sure many folks on the call right now are aware of that. They're experiencing that right now. One of the points that I think you both made is building a support network, right? Talking through what you're thinking about, how to change policies, how to change processes within your organization to fit this kind of transition into remote work is really important. And kind of to dovetail, the second point is make sure you're learning from others. Other folks have either worked remotely before, built remote teams. There's Medium blog posts out there. There's these types of webinars out there about remote work. Learn from others. Like, make it your mission to continue to educate yourself about how to run an efficient and an effective remote team. Because this is going to be, and oftentimes when kind of there's this huge dynamic shift in the way that we work, it's an opportunity. So while a lot of other folks are really worried about this situation, just the work situation, the pandemic is definitely worrisome, but from the kind of the shift in working, try to use this as an opportunity to educate, to learn from others, and figure out how you can make your team even stronger. The third thing is leverage technology. Many of the folks on this call, you're at a nonprofit. When you log in, when you go on a technology provider's page and you see their pricing, reach out, ask if they have nonprofit discounts. Try to find technology providers that can help you be able to run your organization your newly remote organization more effectively and more efficiently. There are tons of technology tools out there that can really help speed up kind of the process of moving into remote work, and then also help you work more effectively and efficiently. And then the fourth thing, which I think is arguably the most important, is make sure that your team buys into the process. Make sure your team buys into what you're doing, right? You have to get everybody aligned. And the way that you do that is going to be completely up to you. It's going to be based off of the personality and the characteristics of the individuals within your team, but also the culture you've already built. What's really important is get that buy-in. Make sure folks are bought into the technology you're using, the processes that you created, the shift in what you're doing, that they understand what the plan is as you transition to remote work, as you continue to work remotely, as you may shift back and forth between remote work and in-person work, depending on what our government leaders instruct us to do. But make sure you get that buy-in. So those are the four points that I think are really important that everybody can execute on when it comes to managing an efficient remote team.
I think that's really good. And, uplifting a few things around just the tools, and those tools that you mentioned from a technology perspective, but those human tools, because when we think about this capital that's coming to a team, you have that human capital, and making sure your team has the capacity and the resources that they need to be able to show up in a way that they can actually continue to do their job. There's this online thing called the water cooler, and there's this meme that if you was a mess in real life, you're probably going to be a mess online.
That's right.
So, that shift that you talked about, those cultural aspects of how you collaborated as a team or not, how you communicated as a team or not, how transparent you were as a team or not. I'm hearing you both say that they're going to show up. And some of it is going to either be for good or for bad when it comes to actually being able to effectively work. Any other thoughts on that?
Well,
I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right there, Shantara. There is definitely kind of the human touch. Whether it's kind of a physical touch or kind of that virtual touch, right? But that human connection is really important, and trying to just have a kind of take human touch and make it virtual oftentimes isn't going to work. You're going to have to figure out how to more so to create the feeling, the emotion, the connection that happens, and not the actual physical kind of touch and turning it virtually, if that makes sense. So figuring out kind of how do you recreate a sense of team, a sense of community, a sense of belonging, a sense of mission in a digital way, in a virtual way, is a task that as leaders of newly remote teams is really important. And that the way that you can do that, learn from others, again, leverage technology, and then use a support network to try things on.
That I 100% agree. And the only thing I would add is also making sure you add socializing. Like you said, the virtual water cooler, make sure you add that. Our team is actually does happy hours, and then they hang out. Sometimes I get on them as the ED, sometimes I don't. I just let the team do it. And you have to have that, all the young people. I don't know. I don't feel young anymore now that they're Zoomers, but they're doing Netflix watch parties. I don't even know how they do it, but they're finding ways to socialize online with their colleagues, because sometimes that's the best part of your day. You sit in your office all day at a standing desk, you're typing for hours and and then sometimes you just walk out to get a cup of coffee. You talk to your colleague for 10, 15 minutes. You think of an idea, you go back, your team gets even stronger. And so you need that socializing aspect of it too, so that you don't lose the camaraderie, and it's not just Zoom all day. And little things, let people have fun Zoom backgrounds and and all those types of things, and be patient too. Sometimes a kid's gonna run across a screen. I know I'm deathly afraid my puppy is gonna bark at any moment. And you just have to,
Jamal has one too, so
yeah, I'm just like, God, he must be sleeping under the table or something. He's so quiet. But those are just like the things that we have to accept. with working virtually, and we should see them as assets. You get to see the whole person, and just make sure we integrate socializing into all of it, especially when you're doing this nonprofit, direct service, civic engagement, all of that. You need that touch. If it can't be physical, at least emotional.
Yeah, and I think the broader message there, Wintana, and for everybody is, lean into to what you just said, to the whole person now, right? Like lean into that. Like it's, have the, 5 minutes where the kids can come in at the beginning of a meeting, because, usually with children, I have nieces and nephews, I don't have any kids, but usually, with my nieces and nephews, what they want to do, like if I tell them they can't come in the room, they want to come in the room, right? If I say, hey, come in the room, then they don't want to be in the room. So why not have a little bit of kind of that social time, and include that into a work meeting, I think is sometimes a great idea. But yeah, I think kind of the broader message of just saying like, hey, here's an opportunity to live what a lot of us say, which is that when you come to work at our organization or your organization, that we want you to bring your whole self. And this is an opportunity to really live that value, if that is a value that's important to you and your organization, and implementing that into your remote process is key. So I think those are really great points, Montana.
Yeah, both of you really hit on, I think that the really key areas, it's first do your work well, and then be able to relax. Because as you think about specifically this type of work that you're doing, and I do want to shift into policy, it's heavy. It's a lot of the issues that you are working on, not only just as Minnesota Voice, but many advocacy organizations, where this through line is improving the quality of life of people. That's heavy when you have people on there. And so being able to create this culture where you have this collaboration, but you can be at ease, I think is important. Montana, I do want to just shift to policy and just ask you, you said that, the work hasn't stopped with you hitting your goal around registration. What barriers have you encountered? You mentioned a win, and what strategies have you deployed in order to continue the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think one thing we've always had access to is something called virtual phone bank. And so you can log into our system and then put on a headset and it'll just pop up numbers, you write a script. But we've always done it in our office. We set up computers, and we have kind of, a conference room full of computers and headsets, and people make calls together. They laugh and they joke. And then they just make the calls. It's very different now. We're still doing that, but now it's like you're sitting in your house and you're making calls for 5 hours, which I think, I've done lots of phone banks in my life, and they're fun. You sit with your friends, you call for a campaign, a candidate, whatever it is. But we've kind of lost that camaraderie part. And so one thing we've been doing is we still do virtual phone banks, but we pair it with Zoom. So you get on Zoom, you mute, and then you just make calls with your colleagues or whoever you're working with. And then when you have a great call, you pop up in the chat, or you turn the sound on and say like, oh my God, I just had the best call, and they donated or they pledged. And you add that to it. Another thing is Minnesota has online voter registration, but we don't have an API. So we don't have a way to move it from my database into the Secretary of State's database. And so that's a huge prevention from us doing online voter registration. So we actually found a workaround. We found a way to get around that, and are actually in constant conversation with the Secretary of State to figure out ways that we can actually build the API. We're looking for, all the legal and all of those. And so we're just building it. Like, we saw the barrier and I'm building the solution, just because this is the most important election of our lifetime. And for Minnesota Voice, we're nonpartisan, but that doesn't mean we don't care about power. We are a very political organization that is unapologetic around communities of color, low income folks, being able to turn out their vote, and then being able to make some policy demands the following year. And that requires me to solve these problems. And so every time I've seen it, I've gone after it. So like, you're bored on phone banks? Cool. Let's add a Zoom. Like, sometimes some of the staff are like, my internet is really weak. Great. I will send you a Verizon hotspot today. Like, just being creative and being innovative. You know,
Mhm.
when I was an organizer, a traditional community organizer, and we needed to do surveys and petitions, and we couldn't find a lot of people, we would just ride the city bus for hours just doing surveys. You know, you got to figure it out. And that's the mindset I'm in now. I would also add, though, at the beginning of it is like we always start with grace. And we always start with compassion. I also never ask anyone to do something I would never do. I would never go to a grocery store, stand in line, and ask everyone to pledge to vote today. I would have, 6 months ago, but I wouldn't do that today. So I don't ask my team or my staff to do that. And so, yeah, those are the things that we're doing. Identify the problem and then, go after it, find the solution, and then always function with grace and compassion.
That's awesome. So you still have that policy North Star. You're just adapting the ways at which you go to be able to tackle how you get to it.
Exactly.
And I think that that's something that's really important. And you said in terms of innovation that this is the time. And I think Damola said it in Crisis, there's this opportunity for you to figure it out in a way that is actually still going to allow you to win. And that's having a growth mindset. I will say that I was smiling that you earlier said, I don't know anything about technology, but you throwing around APIs and things like that. So it just warmed our Civicego heart. Because we hang out with APIs often. So that's something that I think that is cool, that you guys are looking to figure out, how you continue to move the ball forward, which is pretty exciting. I didn't say at the top of our time here that if you have questions and you want to put them in the chat, we are happy to make sure that we answer those questions. I'm pretty sure there are things that are popping up in people's mind, and I want to make sure that if we are able to, we can infuse those inside of the conversation. So I have tons of questions that I can keep asking, but if people have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. So I do want to lean into a little bit of this collaboration piece, because I know that for both of you, it's very important to getting your work in a position where you're able to win. I'm gonna start with Damola. As you think about the work that Civicego does related to collaboration, are there specific components of that allow for the work of Civicego in View in particular to be successful?
Yeah, we look at collaboration as from two perspectives. One is, how do we enable and empower our team to collaborate with one another? And then the second way that we look at it is, what does that mean for collaborating with folks outside of our organization? And for us, that's really partnership and coalition building. And the reason we look at it through those two ways is because we are a technology company that builds software for advocacy groups who have to do those two things. They have to work collaboratively internally, and they have to build coalitions and partnerships externally. And that's the way that we look at it. So our software and our mentality, the building of our software, but also our kind of team mentality on what those two perspectives is really in our kind of corporate DNA, our company DNA. So every single thing that we do, when we think about how we're interacting with each other, the policies that we're setting as an organization, our company ethos, our values, our culture focuses on internal teamwork and collaboration, but then also like external partnerships, coalition building, that type of thing.
That's awesome.
Beautiful. Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
I just, one thing I've been thinking about, and you guys are also like a vendor, and we work with a lot of vendors. How are you guys working with other technology companies? How are you guys coordinating with other service companies to provide better resources to your clients? I know I've been getting emails from Slack and PayPal together, and I'm like, are they working together? I was like, what? And so how has that been? Have you guys been bringing up new ideas? Like, what's the experience been on the
always
side? Yeah.
So Yeah, for us, like, the thing that we do really well is legislative intelligence and the collaboration around that, right? How are you identifying and discovering bills that are introduced that should be important to you or might be important to you and your organization? How are you analyzing it? And then how are you figuring out your position based off of that information, right?
Yeah.
So that's like really our sweet spot. And collaboration kind of is intertwined in all three of those areas because you want to share that information, share your analysis, understand it, figure things out together. What we don't do, because we do that really well, what we don't do, we don't have a digital advocacy tool where you can, use a phone to text all of your members or all of your supporters to, do something, right? We're not a digital activation, advocacy tool. So what we do is we work with those organizations that do that work really well. So one of our partners, we've worked on a couple, partnerships or a couple clients together where we built those relationships, and they focus on digital advocacy. So, we'll work with them to be able to provide their clients with a legislative intelligence solution that we built, and vice versa. If any of our clients needs a digital advocacy tool or software tool, we'll introduce them to our client. And it's just, that's the way that we think is the best way to kind of move forward, is to say, okay, we want to do this thing really, really, really well. We want to focus on this and be the best at it that we possibly can be. And then who has our shared mission, who has our shared values that can help kind of buffer the other things that we know advocacy groups need and we know advocacy organizations need. And to us, that's the best way to build kind of long-lasting, strong partnerships, is to do your thing really well, have that be the core value that you provide to people and to organizations, and then find mission-aligned organizations that can do the other things that your clients and your customers and your partners will need.
And I'll just add to that, the way we work at Civicego is, one, understanding what the pain points of our customers are, because we truly appreciate the entire ecosystem. And I use that language and I use it all the time, because we know that policy can start in one person's head, but to get it over the finish line, there's multiple components to it. And so understanding that in order for our clients to be successful, we hear the entirety of the pain point, and that if there's places that we can refer them and other different types of tools, we're doing that too. But as Damola said, in terms of where our sweet spot and understanding kind of that legislative intelligence piece is core to our work. So thank you.
So now I have a question for you, Antana.
Yeah.
How are you, and as the leader at Minnesota Voice, what have you identified are your strengths and your weaknesses, and how do you partner and work with other organizations to be able to make your weaknesses not weaknesses, right? How do you partner to be able to hopefully turn those things into strengths?
That's a lot.
Great question. You should have that on my list that I sent out.
So the first thing I think about, one thing that I have been really good at building out is building out teams and building out young leaders. I talk about this a lot, but Shantara, Commissioner Hardy is what I call her, has had a massive impact on my life. I tell this story a lot, but there was a time where I wanted to learn so much about the policy process. I used to show up at the Capitol. No one would talk to me. No one would give me any attention. And there was this lady that was a lobbyist for a healthcare company. And I walked up to her and asked her some random question about healthcare that I didn't care about, just because I was like, I want to be this person's friend. And she actually invested in me. For the last decade, she's been investing in my leadership. And the way she's functioned has been a model for me of how I invest in the young people that I've been bringing up. And so I've worked really hard to curate a team of literally the best and brightest. And, some of them need investment in different ways. And I'm investing in those different styles to bring up those teams. And that's been the thing that I think is my strongest ability. And then another thing I think I do well is that I have no apprehensions around asking for money. I have no apprehensions around fundraising. I think that this money belongs to us, and it's in the hands of foundations and wealthy, and should be redistributed to us. And I think a lot of young folks, women, people of color are often told to like, humble themselves. I'm like, no, I deserve all of it. My people deserve all of it. And so that's been a good asset for me. I think the places I can do better that remote has taught me is like little things like filing, knowing what vendors to use. Folks aren't spending a lot of time investing in young women, leaders, people of color, etc., explaining like how different life insurance packages work, how to pay for them as a nonprofit, how to select what healthcare. There isn't a lot of work around that. And folks will tell us how to organize, how to raise money, but like the actual day-to-day operations, we're lucky where I have a lot of operation support staff, but it's something like I open all our mail, I read through our health insurance policies and learn the updates, and I've been investing a lot of time in doing that. And then I would say the last thing that I need to grow at is like having some chill, man. I still don't have any chill. I never had chill before. I don't have it now. Being an activist, you get to just light things on fire, and then usually whatever I burn down, I rebuild. It's like that's what a good activist and organizer does. But when you're an ED, you got to be real careful. What you start on fire. And so, just learning some chill, that's been something I've had a challenge with. And it's actually, it's helped me actually allow my staff to get a little bit more rebellious too, though, allowing them to be more creative, like, be bold, come to me with your ideas, write your own proposals, like share your thoughts with me. Like, I'm all in, I want to support you. And I think the fact that I have no chill is like, I need to get some as an ED, but I think it's been good for our team. It helps them see that they can be innovative too.
Good. That was a really good question, Damola. And thank you. It's been a pleasure to invest in you because individuals like you are setting the foundation for what next looks like. People use the term the new normal. It's next. It's the next. Yeah. It's the next norm. We're in the now normal. Now it's the next normal. And a couple of things I just want to lift up related to what you said. One word that we haven't leaned into is team, and you being able to have the right people around you that see your vision and want to continue to do that. But it's something I always say that you got to make sure that your back office is in order, that you understand how to function from an operations perspective, because that's important, that if your infrastructure runs into a crisis, do you have visibility around making sure that you can continue to move it in a way that it was before the crisis started? Any thoughts on your question, Damola, that you asked her?
No, I appreciate the vulnerability and the authenticity that you shared. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good. So we do have a question here that I wanted to ask you that you mentioned, and I love it because a lot of people don't like to ask other people for money. We like to spend it, but you got to start by asking. And I just want to ask you, Wantana, in thinking about the next normal, do you think you'll have difficulty fundraising? What's your thoughts around that? Because that having the resources is important to do your advocacy very well.
Yeah, one thing that I think has been on my mind is that so we've been lucky, we've been able to stay stable, and I just feel like as like young people of color, like we triple down on our finances. It's just like having reserves on reserves, because you're always afraid that it might fall apart. And so I've been really cautious and prepared around that, but it's been on my mind a lot. And so I think there's two ways to think about it. What are we going to do in 2021? How are we going to stay afloat? It won't be a big election. It'll be just a traditional year. And how do you stay politically relevant and, raise capital? And so I think there's those sets of questions. But I think the bigger question is, how do we create a movement ecosystem that doesn't necessarily always require foundation dollars? what would it look like for our movements to actually invest in more projects like Civic Eagle that can generate its own revenue, that can help feed an ecosystem? What does it look like for us to, start owning our own intellectual ideas and the things we design? How many organizers, think of a really cool tool, build it out for their organization and never see any revenue from it? Not saying we need to like capitalize everything, like far from that, but how do we actually have cooperative ownership over ideas? And like the way you guys are building a team that thought of something that is now producing it. And very often the folks that are doing this technological work in these movement spaces do not look like y'all. And so how do we make sure that it's us that are building, creating, and owning these products so that we're generating more money for our ecosystem, so that we're supporting our internal economies? I'm Eritrean, as you can tell probably from the background, the art behind me, but we really function on cooperative economies. No one person ever starts a business, ever. It's always a bunch of people throwing in money. Sorry about that. Knowing they may not get it back. And it's just an accepted ideology. And then when you do get it back, you cash everyone out, you help out your community. And so we need to like be owning more things so that we can think like that, so we can redistribute funds, so that we can grow our teams and build our staff. And so I'm sure you guys haven't furloughed your staff. And if you did, you probably have a plan of how you're going to do it. That's what we have. I've set up our books so that if we do end up cutting staff, I can give them a healthy severance. And I've been pre-planning my books so that if I end up in a situation, I can take care of my folks. And I think that's what happens when we build like this. And so that's what I think is the future, is like, what does it look like to build more cooperative projects, more cooperative economies, so that we actually aren't dependent on a billionaire's grace to like keep our nonprofits open.
Yeah. And Damola, when Tana alluded to it, we look at nonprofits and they fundraise, but as a technology company, there is a raise. There's the same type of thinking. Did you want to just provide any context from a technology perspective around thinking about resources and how do you have a plan around those as a technology company?
Yeah, I think what Wintana said about having really like a plan A, a plan B, a plan C for how you keep yourself above water is critical. And the plan A usually leads with, other, raising money, right? Other people's money helping you to finance your nonprofit, finance your organization, finance your startup in our case. And then plan B and C usually involves, unfortunately, having to furlough or let people go completely. And then being able to kind of use that as an opportunity to then recover and build again. So for us at Civic Eagle, we're operating in much the same way of saying, okay, what is our plan A? What is our plan B? What is our plan C? But above all of that is what's the most important thing that we have to continue to do, which is build value for the folks that we work with, right? Continuing to invest in providing value to our stakeholders, right? So as an advocacy organization that's listening to this call or to this broadcast, your stakeholders are your community members, right? Continuing to focus on the people that are the most important, and having the plan A, plan B, plan C for how you can continue to perpetually do that. But the focus remaining on how do I continue to bring value to my stakeholders, to the people that are part of my community, part of my organization, because that's the most important thing. One thing that we're hearing a lot about from a government perspective, national perspective is helping to keep our workers employed, right? Mm-hmm. Our philosophy and the way that we look at it at Civic Eagle is that it's not about workers, it's about people, right? Like, don't look at the people on your team, the folks on your team as employees or as workers. They are people. So how do we invest in people? How do we continue to do that? And all of your stakeholders are people. It's an aggregation of individuals, but at the end of the day, they're people. So keeping that top of mind, keeping that front of mind, and letting that be your driving focus has been what's worked for us. But then also, obviously, the economics of your organization and planning for that with a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and so on and so forth is also obviously mission critical.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. No, that's great. And so it's really being strategic about how you move forward with looking for resources, but also not only securing them, but being able to sustain them in the long run so that your team is able to grow, but grow from a healthy perspective is what I'm hearing you both say. That I think that's really important. I think that no matter what type of company that you have. Did you want to add something more, Debola?
Yeah, just to double down, if you invest in your stakeholders and you value them and those people, investors, funders will see that value, right? And that's the best way to position yourself to be able to raise the money that you need to keep your organization going.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So I really want to go a little bit deeper on just the advocacy work. Do you both at all think that the next normal around advocacy, that it will change? Are you, after the dust settles and we go from, being in the midst of this to recovering, do you think it'll change?
Yeah, I think it'll never be the same. I think that we will see a change for the next, 10 years. I don't think it'll go back to how it was. Something that I've been talking to folks about is around environmental justice, is that a lot of folks assume that environmental justice just means like one day the world turns off. No, it doesn't mean the world just collapses. The environmental crisis we're in means that one day there's going to be a scarcity of food. One day there's going to be more viruses. One day there's going to be changes to it's a bunch of really bad things happening over a long period of time until the earth is unusable. And so that's the thing, is like, that's just the new reality, is that like, if we don't start taking care of our healthcare system, if we don't taking care of workers, if we don't change our behaviors, like things like this are just going to keep happening over and over. And I think that this is the new standard, unless we see some dramatic changes to how we make decisions and all of that. And I think in terms of advocacy, like short term next year, I think that it'll slowly get back to a somewhat normal. But what I mean by somewhat normal is we will just accept a new normal. It'll be normal. It should already be normal to wash your hands, but it's
I digress.
Right, but I think it's going to become more, there will be more hand washing stations. It's like if you go to the Arizona airport and you go to the new Minnesota airport is full of, Coca-Cola machines. Arizona airport is full of water bottles every 10 feet, different climates, different behaviors. And so I think if you're in a city that has a higher elderly population, you're probably going to see more hand sanitizers, more people wearing masks all the time, hopefully more access to healthcare. And so I think we're not getting to we're not going to go back to normal. We're going to accept a new normal that we'll get used to, and it'll just become the standard. I think about a world before the internet. It sounds so ridiculous. Well, we survived it, and there's going to be a world, post-COVID that'll become the new normal.
Absolutely. And so it's we as individuals with this presence of this virus had our system shocked, and now the ecosystem has been shocked, and moving forward, it's going to be even dire, is what I'm hearing you say. Like these culmination of days, locusts in Africa.
Yeah.
Never, ever would have thought that would be what's happening. And the results of that, to your point around food insecurity for millions of people, though millions of people already had food insecurity. And so that system being shocked even more. And so as you think about the policy work and advocacy around that, it's dire. It's now dire, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, it's dire. It's not going to stop. It's going to be consistent, and it's just, we have to accept it and do things about it, and and be prepared to shift. And that's I think about specific movements. Like my dad says this quote all the time, is that it's only a democracy if people can fully participate. That applies to everything. It's only an economy if people can get actual living wages. It's only a food system if people can actually eat, all of these things. Things are only as real as the ability for people to participate in them. Otherwise, they're just controlled, games or strategies or whatever you want to call it. And so that's what I think about COVID. We only get through it if we actually care for people, if we actually care for humans and animals and the earth first. And so I think if folks want to go back to normal, wash your hands, stay home. Like, I know Minnesota, stores open up on Monday. Like, don't go to TJ Maxx. You don't need a candle. You'll be fine. Just wait a little bit longer until we get some things set up so that we can care for people, so that we can go back to somewhat. But I think that there's just going to be a new normal that we're just going to accept, and it's going to become the reality.
Yeah. There's you when you mentioned your father's quote, and Damola talks about democracy from that perspective too, and I'll let him jump in. But a quote that I often use when I was a city planner is that if you don't listen to the whispers, you'll eventually hear the screams. And we've been hearing the screams of Mother Nature for a long time. Fill in the blank of other whispers that's been happening in communities with lack of investment and things like that. And now there's a lot of screams. And when you are trying to move policy forward, it becomes very hard to work when it's so loud, when the noise is so loud. And that's, I think that's going to be the part that, from an advocacy perspective, where do you focus? Because there's so much screaming at us because we've neglected for so long. Anything you want to add to that, Damola?
Yeah, looking at it from the starting question, which is, what do I see being kind of big changes as a result of the pandemic as it applies to advocacy groups? I think one that everybody needs to really understand is that there was already a shift happening towards remote work, and this is accelerating it. Folks younger folks that are graduating from undergraduate degrees or advanced degrees, or even not, they're expecting to be able to have flexibility from how they work and where they work. And this is accelerating that expectation. So adjusting your organization as you grow it, or as you look at, when you have the ability to start to hire, as you hire and bring people into your organization, understanding that there's going to need to be flexibility in how people work. They're going to need to work from home. They're going to want to work from home. So starting to really figure out what that looks like for your organization now instead of later will allow you to be able to really attract the best people for your organization, the people that you need to grow your organization and effectively advocate for policy the way that you want to. The second, go ahead, Chantal.
No, finish.
The second thing I think to note that I see really shifting, or we need to understand, is that consolidation is going to happen, right? When there's a contraction in the market, which we're going to experience, a contraction in the economy, you're going to have consolidation. So some organizations are not going to make it. In the private markets, we're already seeing that there's an increase in activity when it comes to acquisitions and mergers, and we're going to see that in the nonprofit space as well. It's going to look different, but we're going to see the same sort of thing. Organizations that can come and work together and kind of merge because they have similar positions or mission fit. That's going to need to happen. And we're also going to see a lot of organizations end up not being able to continue. But understanding that consolidation is going to happen is something that's really important for all of us on this call to understand. So avoiding, making sure that your organization can continue to live and thrive with participating in this broadcast and using some of the tactics and tools that we've talked about is going to be really paramount to making sure that your organization continues to survive and thrive, because consolidation is going to happen. The markets are going to dry up. The economy is going to contract. We're already seeing that. So just understanding those two things, understanding what the future is going to look like for workers and how to position yourself to attract the best ones. And then also understanding that consolidation is going to happen are two things that I think are of note.
So that's very interesting. In putting on kind of both of your policy hat, do you, and this can be yes or no, do you recommend advocacy organizations to, in addition to their mission critical policies that they're working on, to be thinking about policies around remote work and the future of work do you think advocacy organizations should be pushing policy in those spaces?
100%. I 100% agree with you on that. I think that they should be, looking at, obviously you got to focus on the thing that you are, you're working on, right? As an advocacy organization, you have specific policy issues that you want to focus your attention on, but your group, your organization is a lot more than that policy issue. And understanding and being part of the conversation is going to be critical, so that you can so you can understand the direction that our country is heading, the direction that the world is heading, and legislation is going to play a big role in that. So paying attention to all of those things that impact your organization, not just the policy areas that you're doing your advocacy work on, I think is going to be mission critical. And I think the organizations that do a good job of understanding the holistic nature of their organization will be the ones that end up really surviving and thriving in this next normal, as you put it.
Mm-hmm. Anything you want to add to that, Montana?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. Like, I couldn't agree with that more. We've had partner organizations that are already talking about consolidation, not because they want to, but they're talking about how would we consolidate who, especially these larger institutions that were already on a financial brink. They're already talking about it. There are direct service orgs that just can't, function right now, that close their doors. And so I think that's absolutely right. And I think you don't have to see it as a loss. I think sometimes things just need to merge. And that's okay. Sometimes it's actually better in the long run, but we should be prepared for that. And be thinking about that, and thinking about financial security and what's the best idea, not just for individual leaders, but for, the movement and the people.
Yes. I think you said it. What's the best idea for the movement? And I'll just add my language. A lot of the work that happens in the advocacy space, it's about securing the safety net. And if the safety net is able to be strong enough to hold those that you're working with and for, the organizational makeup may have to look different. But if the goal is to make sure that the safety net is strong enough for people, how do you make sure the policies and the processes and those in charge reflect the needs of that safety net? So we have about 4 minutes left. A couple questions left. I want to make sure that I end on just two that I have. One, I am very interested in understanding from you two as leaders in policy, what do you think is some of the one or two important policy areas that should be front and center for us right now? I know it's hard. Two.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even hard. I already knew it right off the top of my head. I think one, voting rights in general. I think every state has a different law that they need to pass, but I think we need to figure out how we're going to have secure and modern elections in this moment. And that's that we just have to figure that out. I consider myself an activist, and I care about a lot of issues, from police accountability to housing. But at the end of the day, if we can't have basic, secure, and modern elections, it's going to be really hard to do all of the rest of the work we want to do. And so I see voting rights as the floor. And so I think that needs to happen. I think the second thing is we need long-term economic shifts. So the idea that that's been on my mind is that we think about healthcare, and we think about loans, we think about small as all these different things. No, those are just responses to an economy. And we need to figure out ways that we're going to support folks. Minnesota has the highest Black unemployment in its state history. It is so high right now. No one talks about that. No one is talking about the impacts on Black people. We're dying at the fastest rates, all of that. And I think that if we don't talk about an economic bailout, an authentic economic bailout to the scale that we've done for corporations, for everyday folks, then there won't be anything to respond to. None of us will have the money to buy the goods from corporations. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's just, we need an actual authentic economic bailout for everyday people, and not a $1,200 check. We need a real long-term solution if we want to keep fighting for America as we know it. And then the second part is elections. We need secure, modern elections. We're a nonpartisan organization. I don't care who people vote for. I just want them to vote and participate in the election. And for that to happen, they need to know that they can show up on election day and not catch a virus. So those are the two things that I think are extremely important and need to happen.
All right. I'm going to shift this question because we are at a minute for Damola. I want to just ask, because just 10 seconds, we talked about a whole lot. We talked about collaboration. We talked about shared outcome. We talked about building strong relationships. We talked about, how do we make sure that as we think about advocacy, that the back office and systems are in place in order for people to survive. What's your advice for advocacy organizations in the now with respect to remote advocacy and going into the next? What is going to be one thing that allow for them to win?
Pay attention. So just real quickly, I can answer both of the questions that you posed. One, in terms of two kind of policy areas to pay attention to, voter rights, like Wintana said, but also any legislation pertaining to a COVID-19 response. Congress has introduced over 300 bills pertaining to COVID-19 response. Minnesota alone has introduced over 100. So you multiply that times 50, there's a lot of COVID-19 legislation. Pay attention. Know what's moving in those bills. They almost are de facto omnibus bills. There's a lot of different policy areas being touched in those COVID-19 bills. It's not just public health stuff or economic stuff. There's things that pertain to nearly all policy areas. Try to do your best to pay attention to bills that are moving, even if they don't seem like they initially impact your policy areas. And I think that that's the best way that you can win right now is by paying attention. But then also as a remote team, the 4 points that I made earlier, leverage technology, leverage support networks, get buy-in from your team, and really learn from others, right? So if you can do those 4 things, I think that, and then pay attention, I think you'll be set up to win.
Wintana?
I would say what sets you up to win would be, I don't know. I feel like you just said them all. I felt like you left me with nothing juicy with. I think it's all of that. I think that's like spot on. Like pay attention, take care of yourself, drink water, wash your hands. Like I hate to be a kindergarten teacher with it, but like 30 seconds, wash your hands. Take care of yourself, take care of your elders. There is no us without individuals, and there is no individuals without us, or I don't know, however that phrase goes, but you got to take care of yourself to take care of others. And be cautious, watch the policies. And I would say one thing that I've experienced with policy during crisis moments is a lot of people pass bad bills and we don't notice them. The Patriot Act, pay attention, watch and advocate for yourself, advocate for your people, and give it your all, but also, remember to stay rooted in your self-care and your people's care and your health. And yeah.
All right. Put your mask on first and then keep fighting.
Exactly.
I love it. Damola and Wintana, thank you both for participating in InView by Civicego's webinar, How to Keep Winning as a Remote Advocacy Team. A lot of wisdom and gems that were left here. I hope those that were able to join us live, but those who listen later, that you're able to gather a few pieces that can move your work forward. I do want to mention one resource that Civicego has created. We have an ebook that is really focused on how do you effectively move forward stakeholder engagement. It's free. You can download it from our website. They'll allow you to be more strategic, align with Wintana's mention around having your back office in order and having structure around how you move your engagement forward. And so thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful day and take care of yourself.